Dominic'i sahneye alabiliriz.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you for bringing me all over from England. So, this presentation is about B2B SEO. And you can download the slides for it, and there's a blog post that goes with it. But honestly, don't worry about any of that, because I'll show this at the end, and I'm going to talk through it now, and that'll be so much better. So let me take you back to 2011. If you've forgotten 2011, it's when moves like Jagger was still cool. That's roughly where we are. And I was in my last year of university. And I was really struggling with, what adults did. Right? I was about to become an adult, and I was pretty sure they paid bills and that they owned beds. But that was about it. I certainly had no idea what they did for jobs all day. I just kind of couldn't wrap my head around this. This is the same thing that 4-year-olds have. You just kind of can't conceive of it, and this was a problem because I was applying to a lot of companies, and they would, places like PwC. Spoiler alert, I don't work for PwC. This doesn't go well. And they would ask all these questions, things about it, where they'd go, what do you like about what we do? Why are we specialists in this thing that we do? But I didn't know what it was that they did. So I did what any good student would do, and I Googled it. And of course, so the first thing is, at PwC, our purpose is to build trust in society. Okay, that's not a job. So we go, okay, and they go, what about creating value? We create value. And it's like, but I was a student. This is the value that I was most familiar with. So it's like, okay, that really hasn't helped. So we go into the definition of consulting, and it's like we're in the business of transformation. It's like, again, this is the transformation that I'm familiar with. Right? Really, I'm not on this level quite yet. Worse still, at that point, I then go and look at the business pictures to see if I can guess from those what might be going on. And if you can take anything away from stock business photos, it's that business is fundamentally about several people working on one computer. They never have a computer each. They all only get one computer, and they're forced to sit around it and point at it as a group. So I bounced really hard off the world of business and B2B, and when I left, I went and I joined these guys. I joined The Writer. They're a company who specialized in helping businesses sound more like actual people and getting rid of jargon. And when I left those and I went and joined marketing, I worked for B2C marketing. I worked for giant websites where it was very obvious what they were doing. But you don't get to pick your clients. So before you know it, I'm dragged kicking and screaming into the wonderful world of business. And to the horror of university me, I actually quite enjoyed it. Because here's the thing. People will tell you that B2B and B2C SEO are the same thing. But they're not the same thing. They have a couple crucial fundamental differences that when you open the door and you look inside, they're just not the same. Now, a lot of people will tell you the same. They will passionately argue that they're the same. Those people are wrong. This one here is an alpaca and a llama. I honestly couldn't tell you which one was which, but when you were looking for things that are similar, this one endlessly comes up. Now, I really enjoy both of them. Both of them I spend a lot of time with, but they are fundamentally different. And we're going to jump into a quick example to kind of ground, hopefully, what will then be the rest of this presentation. The first big B2C company that I ever worked for, they were huge. And our keyword research strategy was this. It was Simba, everything the light touches, we should rank for that. So obviously, that meant things like this. second-hand Ford Fiesta for sale in London. Clearly, we should rank for that. But this is even better, you know, Ford for sale in the UK, a little bit more generic. What about car for sale in the UK? That's even better. Well, let's go even more generic than that. What about car for sale, or just the word car? That's really what we want to rank for. You know, better still, this is truly where we want to be. And then you contrast that with the first B2B company that I ever worked for. And I pitched this. I said, guys, we should make a definition of enterprise content management. And they're like, Dom, the person who reads this content, right, the guy we're trying to sell to is this guy. You know, he's an experienced business man or woman. You know, they've years and years in the industry. He's not someone who's reading definition pages, right? That's not what he's doing. That's what I'm doing when I'm trying to find a job. So it's, okay, so I mean, what would that guy search for? What might this successful business CEO be looking for? Maybe something like this. Enterprise Content Management Magic Quadrant. Right? What the fuck is a Magic Quadrant? For those of you who aren't familiar, Magic Quadrant is a report that Gartner puts out. It's a technology report, and is essentially who are the technology leaders in certain spaces. I have no idea at this point. But hopefully that hammers down, at least in one example, some of the differences that you can see between B2B and B2C SEO. And the point where I realized that I was playing a game, and it was a very similar game, but not quite the same game. So the rest of this presentation is going to be in 3 blocks. Firstly, we're going to look at, can everyone succeed in B2B search? If you're trying to decide if you should make an investment in it. If you're trying to decide if you should go to someone and promise that you can succeed for them in search, what should you consider? We're then going to talk about how do you make great content in B2B. So, spoiler alert, that's where this presentation is going. And then finally, we're going to talk about measuring it. Throughout this whole thing, there's some research that I've done. There's obviously a lot of personal experience that goes into this, but there's some research as well, and we're going to dip in and out of this as we go through it. I took 343 B2B companies and the 5 million different keywords that they ranked for. I got the companies from the SAS 1000 because it provided a nice pre-qualified list of vaguely respectable companies. I corroborated some data with Crunchbase and got the keyword data from Ahrefs. Some of you might be wondering, very reasonably, why 343, Dom, when it says SAS 1000? As it turns out, Ahrefs has some limits on how much data you can download when you're preparing for a presentation. And once I'd ruined our agency's Ahrefs plan for the month, decided perhaps it was better time to stop. So, this is more than enough, however, to draw the conclusions that we're going to draw. So firstly, let's just benchmark this data. Let's get an idea of what this is working with. Most of the companies we're looking at are relatively large. The vast majority of them have between 50 and 500 employees. There's a small segment with 0 to 10, and a fairly large one with 500 to 1,000. Secondly, most of the companies we're looking at are based in the US and then the Europe afterwards. From my own personal experience, I would say that what we've seen here lines up relatively well with what I've seen in Turkish SERPs, but useful context. So that's the breakdown of that. Let's dive into it. Can everyone succeed in it? We're going to look at 5 things, right? 5 things to consider. The first is the size of the company. Does having a larger company mean that you will be more successful in search? Is that something you should consider when deciding, should I invest, should I go for this? These are the 2 things correlated on a graph. So on the y-axis, we have traffic, and on the x-axis, we have size of size of company, where it's proxied by number of employees. And essentially, if there was a strong relationship here, this graph would look like this. As we got more employees, we would get more traffic. But there isn't a relationship here, right? It looks like that. Company size doesn't correlate with traffic. Essentially, if you're a small B2B company, you can still succeed in search. Congratulations, carry on listening to this presentation. You don't have to turn off yet. Which brings us on to audience size, right? This is our second thing to consider. The average, if you have the cost of getting one more person to come visit your blog post is 0, right? The cost of getting one more person to click on an ad is something. So search is naturally better when you have a larger audience, right? This is fairly obvious. The bigger your audience is, the more you're getting that benefit from search. But there's a fun thing with B2B companies, which is that to begin with, you start off with a very, well-reasoned product. You often with quite a small targeted product where you go and you pick one segment of the market and focus on it. But then feature creep happens. You're quite successful. You add new things onto your product. Your product gets bigger and more impressive. And before you know it, you have a lot larger of an audience with a lot more features than you probably planned on in the first case. So for many B2B companies, your audience will grow over time. And at some point in that journey is when you're going to need to revisit search. It's probably not the thing you do first. It's not how you get your first 100 customers. But as your product grows, it's going to get better. This next thing to consider is a people problem. So I'm sure as you're all familiar with, I'm sure as you've heard people talk and endlessly go on at conferences like this, the bottom of the funnel is becoming constricted. Google is rolling out more and more ads. There are more and more SERP features. If you're, for example, working in B2B software, there are giant companies like Software Advice and Gartner who dominate this area and dominate a lot of the SERPs. Organic is forced to move up and plays very well naturally in the top half of your sales funnel, in that awareness, in that initial kind of consideration phase. But we're working in B2B. So these sales funnels have multiple people in it, and they tend to be quite long. Sometimes it can take like a month for the decision makers in the sales cycle to actually complete. If you're unlucky, 6 months, if you're selling really big enterprise products. What this means is you have organic is something that is really valuable at the beginning of a very, very long process. And you end up with this. You end up with 12 angry men in a room arguing about who did what. And this guy here is your sales guy, and he's really loud and really determined that he should get all of the credit. This guy's your PPC guy. He's just as determined that he should get some of the credit. And you're quietly sitting in the corner as the search guy, being like, we did loads of work at the start. You end up with a people problem. You end up with the problem that brand marketers have. They've had this forever, except that digital marketing has been telling everyone that we can measure everything since the beginning of digital marketing. So it's harder for us. So this is something to consider here. Essentially, the shorter your sales funnel, the easier it's going to be to persuade people that search is useful. The easier it is to get investment in your search program. If you have a very long sales funnel, you're going to struggle to even get the money to do this. Next, how innovative are you? How new is your product? So if we go back to the 90s, the way people make websites is you run your website on your own computer. That was fairly inefficient, so we moved it to the cloud or somebody else's computer. But that was still quite inefficient. If you just wanted to store photos, you don't need processing power. And if you just need processing power, if you're just running calculations, you don't need to store photos. We don't need storage. So what happened is that became granular. And AWS Lambda, if you've not heard of it, this was an AWS product that just sold processing power, and they released it in 2014 to 15, and the generic term for it now is serverless computing. So this is the chart of the search volume, the people searching for it. When they release it, no one's looking for it. Fairly obviously, because it didn't exist. Search wasn't going to be much use for them. Google Cloud and Azure came along a little bit later, and when they got there, there was a bunch of people. There was a bunch of search volume, and they could make far better use of it. Essentially, if you've created something brand new, again, you're going to look a lot more like brand marketing. Finally, what about brand? Do you need it? I genuinely didn't come into this presentation with much of an opinion on how important this would be. Would it be super important? Would it be not that important? Of all those 343 companies that I looked at, about half the traffic that they got was branded. And I was like, okay, great. And then within that, there were companies that had no branded traffic that were doing well, and there were companies that were almost all branded traffic and were doing very well. So really, there was everything on the spectrum. But we did also find this point, which I'm sure many of you will expect, which is that, again, another correlation here. The more branded traffic you got, on average, probably the more traffic that you got. Essentially, if Google is measuring brand, or if it's finding a way, whether it's through links or brand or however it is, to measure authority, the more authority you have, the easier it is to get traffic. So, You don't need brand to do well in search, but it's obviously going to be helpful. So we end up with these 5 things. If you're considering investing in search as a B2B company, if you're considering working for a B2B company and promising that you can turn them around, the size of the company, doesn't really matter. But these 4, how big the audience is, and because of that, how long the product has been around for, the length of the sales process, how innovative they are in the brand strength, those all have a massive determination on how successful and the expectations that you should set for your program when you join. So how can we make great content? Firstly, let's probably justify that that's what we should do. I took those 343 companies and I categorized all the pages that they were getting traffic to. And this is the non-branded traffic. So we can see of those companies, about 16% of the traffic came from the home pages. What's interesting about this is a lot of this is informational content, right? So all of these ones here in red, these are informational content options. And these 3 here, mass-generated product page, home page, and product page, these are transactional content. So we're going to briefly dip into the transactional content first. What are mass-generated product pages? And I'm going to talk, as we go through this, about why I'm only briefly doing transactional content. So mass-generated product pages are things like this. This is Zapier. If you've not come across Zapier, it allows you to connect 2 things without code. So when you make a Google Doc, it could automatically create a Trello card for you, or vice versa. And they've made a page on their website to say, you can connect Google Docs to Trello with Zapier. But this is a templated page, so they've done the same thing with Pipedrive. So if you get a deal in Pipedrive, it might automatically make a Trello card. Essentially, their product allows them to make hundreds of granular pages for slightly different search intents. SimilarWeb do a similar thing. I have no better way of saying that. They have pages for many popular websites that show statistics about those websites. That's the product that they sell. Their product allows them to be very granular and automatically generate landing pages. That's great if you can do this, but most of us just can't. There aren't 1,000 different ways to say accounting. For most of us, this is just not an option. So if this is an option, fantastic, go and do it. But for most of us, it won't be. And that brings us onto the home pages and product pages. And my big caveat with these is that this is the end of the game. You don't put CRM, let's say that you run a real-time sales CRM piece of software. That's the example we're going to use here. If you put CRM into your homepage isn't suddenly going to rank for it. HubSpot probably could. Salesforce probably could. But that's because they've done a huge amount of brand building and conferences and link building and earning that and putting themselves at the top of their field. This is not the thing that you get when you start. This is the end of the journey. You still need to do some competent SEO, right? You still have to have your basics in order. But this is the thing that you get in the end. There are still a couple things specific to B2B that I want to mention here, though. Firstly, watch out for new trends. Did anyone see Bird Box? It was great. Essentially a woman, too terrified to do it. You can't do anything. She has to be blindfolded for almost everything she does in the entire movie. And there was a very wonderful flash-in-the-pan trend. It probably lasted for all of a week and a half, where people would blindfold themselves and do stupid things while they were blindfolded. Some people went up escalators. Other people drove cars. And this guy walked along the edges of roofs while he was blindfolded. It was a really short-lived trend, and a whole bunch of people, thankfully not him, injured themselves while doing this. It was a flash in the pan. The same thing happens in B2B. So a while ago, Gartner, the aforementioned large technology thought leader people, decided that enterprise content management should be called content services. And the company I was working with at the time changed, like the brand team came in hard and said, this is the future. And they changed everything to content services. But no one was looking for content services yet because it was a trend, and then, like Bird Box, it failed to take off. It didn't hang around for very long. So they flipped all of their pages and they lost all of their traffic, and I sat there looking vaguely smug because I told them it would happen. Don't change your crucial pages. Pick another page, spin up an extra one, and monitor to see how these trends go. Next one. Look out for jobs and not features. So when you have a product, you have, in the top nav, you have your product pages. And usually, those will have either features in them, right? So it'll be my product features. If we come back to our real-time sales CRM, and the idea of a feature you might have is a real-time insights. So you might have a real-time insights page. This page is going to be in your top nav. It's going to be incredibly well linked to. Users are going to visit it. Salespeople are going to send it to them. It's a good candidate to rank for something in search. You don't want it as real-time insights. You want your top product pages to be the jobs that your product does or the problems that it solves. You want things like real-time sales tracking. That's what you want those top pages to be, and you should fight for them not to be features pages. HubSpot, for example, are very good at this. They do AA, and there's someone else who does a good job of, they just have in their top-level software, they don't have features there anymore, which they used to. Next. Finally, you've got to make sure that the home page and the product page is the right page in the first place. This is the SERP, or at least the first 5 parts of it, for exit interview. If you make exit interview software, these are all very informational, right? This is somewhere you want to be, but this is probably not where your home page should be. Right? Your home page is going to struggle to rank here because it's very informational. It will rank relatively well for exit interview software. But just because your home page is the strongest page on your site doesn't mean that it should necessarily rank for the head term. You've got to match that SERP intent. We're going to come back to that. So, that brings us all the way around, right? We have that transactional content. And if you're already in a company that is strong, you can do some things here, and you can do some basic SEO, and usually do okay for it. But for most of us, this is what we should be spending the majority of our time doing. This is the kind of marketing that when we're talking on the search side of things, it's going to help us. So let's talk through a process for doing it well. Firstly, we're going to set expectations. Back to that data. Of those 343 companies, they got most of their traffic from just 10% of their pages. And sadly, that's also most of their non-branded traffic from 10% of their pages. We're excluding the branded traffic from the homepage here. Essentially, if you go and you promise that everything that you make will be beautiful, this is a phenomenal picture of a Darth Maul cake. It just looks fantastic. If you promise them everything will look like this, and then you go and make them 10 cakes that look like this, obviously people are going to be disappointed. You need to, that picture is better the longer you look at it, by the way. The longer you stare at that picture, the better it gets. But this is the problem, right? That you have to set those expectations up front. Because if people expect that a content program will succeed every time, it won't. It just doesn't. Secondly, you need to go build your keyword universe. So take your sales funnel. Take everything everyone has thought of, everything that they might think, every problem they might encounter, and go and stick all of those in a big old Excel document or Google Sheets. Keywords with low volume are still valuable, particularly the more valuable your product is. B2B software also often has very large average value, at which point low volume keywords still just as valuable. Then we move on to the third part, so we want to group them here. So we want to do 2 kinds of grouping. The first one is a fairly dull, ordinary topic grouping. We just take our keywords and we say, great, you could do this with Python if you were feeling overly complicated, or you could just sit there and have someone go through and say, great, everything that contains the word sales is sales related. However you fancy doing this. We also want to do SERP-led grouping. So here's an example to kind of have this one here. Again, it doesn't really matter what enterprise content management here is, but we do have 2 different questions. What is enterprise content management? And why is enterprise management important to an organization? They are different questions. But the results for them are the same. So I've only got the top 4 here for sake reasons, but we can see those 3 in green have moved over to the other side. Google is essentially showing a very, very similar SERP for 2 different queries. So do we need 2 pages for these? No, all of these keywords should be clustered together. Now take content marketing, right? Where we've got what is content marketing and the benefits of content marketing. These are 2 unique questions. But in this case, the SERPs are totally different. There is no overlap between these SERPs. If we want to target these things, we're going to need 2 separate posts. So grouping of our third stage, once we've got our keywords and we're starting to group them, this overlaps with the 4th step, which is prioritizing. These 2 kind of blend into each other. So we have loads of keywords and we've started grouping them, but we don't have loads of budget. We don't have loads of money. So how do we pick what's worth doing? How can we figure out beforehand which content will probably do better. So firstly, certain content, certain terms will just convert better for your users. And sadly, the easiest way to get this is to go out and talk to people. It's frustrating, it's horrible, it's awful. We all love sitting behind computers and we hate talking to people. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we just go and did that? Your sales team are incredibly useful here. Your customer success agents are incredibly useful. You want to go and talk to those people because they will understand the kind of problems that your users are running into when they bought and when they were about to buy or when they've just bought. Talk to your salespeople. As a backup, and in my experience, this isn't as good. If you do have paid data, if you have data for ads, or if you have data for Facebook ads, paid ads, this can be a useful way to see where you could get some of that. But in my experience, it is usually far trumped by the human element. Next, find out where you have opinions. There is nothing better than an opinion. Now, if you have content that is out there and has no opinion, it's still okay. But it's not great. Ideally, you want to have an opinion, or at best, a controversial opinion. That's even better than an ordinary opinion. And as marketers, it's hard to have these. So what you want to go and do is find someone who has an opinion. This is going to be the people who do whatever it is that your company sells. Right? B2B things are often technical or specific to some industry. You're going to need whoever is practicing and using your software. If you have consultants, if you have experts, if you have outside people. We're going to come back to this later on, because this is a really important point. You also need to make sure that your company is willing to have an opinion, right? B2C companies are willing to have these big, amazing opinions. This is the kind of opinion that a B2B company has. It's not quite the same thing, but it is still an opinion. So find out what opinions your team has or can get, and what your company is willing to say. You also want to see if there's any unique data that you have, or if you can source unique data for any of these content ideas that you now have. Brian Dean is phenomenal at this. His posts do far better than many other similar posts in the search industry. And that's not because his conclusions are any different. The conclusions are often identical. But the thing that matters, the thing that he does a phenomenal job of, is saying, here's the data that backs up my thought. And it's really clicky. Even if I already know what it's going to go and say, I'm probably still going to read it just to be like, oh, he said the same thing I was expecting. The data was really, really good, and he does a phenomenal job of it. Finally, we want to check that we can make the content that the intent of the SERP is requiring. So if we take cost of living, nearly all of the results for cost of living are calculators. If you can't build a calculator, if you don't have a dev team or some resource where you can generate this, there's no point trying to compete for this term. There will be easier, better terms. So what we come out of here is we come out with, okay, so at this point, we've gone and we've got all of our keywords. We've taken them and we've grouped them, either roughly by topic, and then we've grouped them by SERP to understand which, within a topic, how many pages should we have on that topic. And we're going to build those in the sort of the standard hub and spoke model, that I'm not really going to go into here, but you have a piece of head content and then you have lots of other pieces of content sitting around it. This is how you discover which of those you get. Then in there we're going to prioritize, because we only have limited resource, about what we can do and what we can get. Finally, we come to making the content. And we're going to cover, again, this could be a talk of an entire presentation. So we're just going to cover a couple of brief things on here. Firstly, you have to write for the SERP. And this is a real problem in B2B. Right, if you have 5 people searching for enterprise content management, Google wants all 5 of them to have a fantastic experience. It's going to measure the user signals from all 5 of them. But only one of them is the CEO who will buy our product. The other 4 of them are people like me, Googling it for presentations and trying to find jobs. And what your sales team and the other people want to do is they're right to write a blog post that only targets the CEO. The problem is if you do that, Google will see it, and 4 people will have a terrible experience with your content because you've written it for a CEO. And you won't rank. So you have to be able to write with depth. You have to be able to write first for something that anyone who could possibly be searching for this, you want to try and answer it as broadly as possible. And then you want to provide the dive-in-off points where someone with more experience can jump to the bit of the content or go, here is the bit that the CEO wants to read. You have to do both. Then we have to decide where it should live. Now, a lot of times in B2B, it doesn't necessarily need to live on our own website. This is an example of Nuxio. So it's an AWS, it's a content management software. It's specifically on AWS. Now, because this is an AWS SERP, right, every single URL here is from aws.amazon.com. There are no other websites here. But Nuxio made a good page on the AWS marketplace, and now they rank for it with there. They rank for that generic term with their own specific page, despite the fact that they no longer support AWS. But they still got it there. That's how strong this was, that even though the page is no longer correct or relevant, it still ranks very well. Other examples you see of this is, if you work in the software area, what you'll see a lot of is people like Capterra and Software Advice and CMS Wire. These big providers where they're essentially a meta search engine for software that you will appear, they collate reviews, and you can pay to be at the top of them. If you're considering one of them, how do you decide which one you should pay for? You do a search analysis on them, and you work out which of them has the most exposure in the area that you want to be. There are plenty of other websites who might be able to rank where you can't, and if you can just get yourself on that website, your job will be easier. Finally, you're going to need to get the experts. For many B2B areas, and I've seen this time and time again, they'll write about things like this, right? I have no idea what this is. Most marketers have no idea what this is and couldn't go and write this post and do a good job of it. If you're making a content marketing campaign and you're not selling marketing tools to other marketers, in which case, go ahead, write your content. But if you're not marketers selling to marketers, you're going to need to be able to write stuff like this. You're going to need to have the expertise to write good things. You're going to need to make sure that when this program is made, that you get time from the experts. Don't promise a successful content campaign if it's just you on your own back, writing about something that you struggle to understand. You can get a good understanding of it, but you'll never truly have those opinions. Those things will make the content sing like the experts. Sometimes these experts can live outside of your own company. Right? Places like Lynda have done a phenomenal job of this. This is a very specific example. They make courses, so obviously they have these experts. But one a little bit closer to us is Moz. Right? This is a very long-term decision here, but many people, myself included, have written stuff for the Moz blog. They've managed to get a bunch of experts to write on their topic because of the community and the things that they built. However you get these experts, you're going to need to get them in some way, whether it's because you have a community where you can offer things to them, or whether it's because you're willing to pay for them or get time for them internally. Finally, we have measurement. And this one is so important that it gets its own section. We've just kind of assumed this up until this point. We've just assumed that organic traffic, ... profit, great, everyone's happy. And that's not really how it works. I found this stunning post by a particular B2B site when I was digging through this. The leadership leaders' lessons from Henry VIII. And this apparently was bringing in a whole bunch of search traffic. I suspect it was probably not bringing in a whole bunch of money. And it's probably one of the reasons why when you go to people and you go to your leadership team and say, look at all the incredible content we wrote, they might be slightly skeptical about some of the leads, whether or not they're bringing in leads. And we're providing brand value, remember, that's the other thing. So we have trouble persuading people about this. This is the first word that we've all heard and will all have come up here. As a brief primer, if you're sitting in this room and haven't heard of attribution, we're essentially answering the following question. User visits from Google, he lands on a blog post. 2 weeks later, he visits from PPC, he hits a landing page, and he gets a demo. Who do we give credit for that demo? Do we give it to the Google blog post, or do we give it to PPC? Attribution is answering that question. I'm not going to go into any more detail there. There's entire presentations on this. There are plenty of good resources out there. At this point, we just conceptually need to understand this is the problem we're solving. So crucially to attribution is a single user. We need to know that user, when he went to Google and then came through PPC, is the same user. Because if it's not, attribution doesn't work. We have no way of making that decision. By default in GA, if you visit on day 1, and then you don't come back for 90 days, you count as a new user, which is long enough for many B2C products. For a whole chunk of B2B products, that's actually not enough. Worse still, attribution has gotten harder. So Safari have rolled this out by default. Mozilla followed, although I suspect Chrome won't. They rolled this update, and what it means that now is that window is 7 days. So if you visit on day 1, and then you visit on day 8, you're 2 new users. Most of our businesses don't have the ability to even solve this problem. If you visit on your desktop and then on your phone, you're 2 different users. And in B2B, there are multiple stakeholders. There are multiple people involved in buying a product often. And we don't have any way of tying them together either. Essentially, attribution is really hard and harder for B2B companies. Worse still, we play at the top of the funnel. So there is a good chance that someone visits on day 1 and then doesn't visit for 30 days more. Sometimes it's 6 months. So attribution is often hard when you work in a B2B company. It often undervalues search, undervalues those benefits. You might have a company that is shit hot at this and can just make this work, in which case, fantastic. However, for the rest of us, this is a really great question to try and answer. Does the right person have a good experience? Let's look at the good experience part first. Firstly, bounce rate and time on page. These are the 2 default metrics that are shown in GA, many other analytics software, and that we use if we try to decide if someone's having a good time. They are, by and large, not useful and bad. I don't have time to go into why. They're just not great. These are far better metrics, things like adjusted bounce rate, scroll tracking, action tracking, engaged time on page. Find good user metrics to help you understand how people are interacting with your content. There's a bunch of resources here. Those are both in the slides and on the blog post where you can go and read more about these things, because I don't have time to go into them now. Secondly, the right person part. This is really hard in B2C. But in B2B, we have a cheat, which is that we can say, does the right company have a good experience? We don't need to look at people because we're selling to companies. And it means you can use things like this. Services like Clearbit and Prospectify will allow you to take anonymous IP traffic and attribute it to a company. So what you can do is you can say, the person who visited my blog wasn't just a random nobody. It was someone from Netflix or CarWow or the British government. These 2 things together, saying what is a good experience and which companies are having a good experience, that allows you to generate stuff like this. Things like engaged sessions from qualified companies. I can tell from the people that my marketing cares about, who is having a good experience, and this can help me track the performance of my search over time. I can see which topics are performing best, which topics are giving the best impression to my users. So, to wrap it all up, firstly, those first 5 points, you need to understand how the nature of those things, how the nature of your business will change search, because it will. Of those 5 up there, the 4 bottom ones are the most important ones. Those are the ones that you're going to want to spend time with. Those are the ones that, if you have perhaps a very, very long sales process, a small audience, and you're not, and you're very innovative, don't turn to them and promise that you can make them loads of money with search, because it's going to be really, really hard. Secondly, don't start with the home pages and the product pages. If you're really well established and well built as a brand, yes, begin with them. But for many of us and many of the people that I end up talking to or working with, that isn't the case. You can't start at the end, you have to start at the beginning, and that means making content. When you're writing that, the most crucial thing is to match for the SERP, in which case the single best signal you can get is how much SERP similarity is there between 2 SERPs. That does change over time, and if you'll look at some sort of seasonal things, take a look at things like Valentine's Day, they will absolutely switch, and you'll definitely see the makeup of that. B2B ones, however, tend to be a little bit more static. Then you need to find that edge for your content. The single best one, in my experience, is opinions. You tend to have to find other people to get those opinions. So you're going to have to get someone else who has opinions, and you're going to need your content campaign to have those. And finally, to help share your success with people, to help tell people why this is a good thing, you need to answer this question. Does the right company have a good experience? And that will be able to tell you, in lieu of good attribution, whether or not your search is being effective and is doing well as a brand tool for you. Get you better engagement metrics than the default ones. Plenty of other people have written about that, and like I said, I don't really have time to go over it here. And the final way for that is that we use an enrichment service. Those tend to be quite expensive. So the other thing that we'll do there is often people will find I've seen people turn them on and off. Or I've seen them limit the number of requests that go back to the service just to essentially save some money, because they are quite expensive. So, if this is where the slides are, and there is a blog post which goes through in text for a lot of the stuff that I've said now, so you can go and get that. Finally, if you want to reach out to me, I'll be hanging around for the rest of the day, so come ask questions, things like that, or tweet me at Dom Woodman. Cheers all. All good.
Thanks so much, Dominic, for your presentation. It was so informative. Do you have any questions for him? No?
Looks like I'm getting off scot-free.
That means you answered all the questions. Thank you so much again.
Cheers, thanks for having me.
Our next speakers